Boy, you've written a really interesting chapter here in your book on trauma and shame. And I don't know, whether we're looking at the news and talking about, potential war between Ukraine and Russia, we're talking about the breakdown in human.
Important for us to recognize is that trauma, and the way we talk about it clinically, trauma has to do with perception. It has to do with my perceived sense of two things. One is that I'm overwhelmed by something. It could be a single event. It could be a series of events that could take place over a course of weeks or years. It could be I get T-boned in an intersection. It could be one thing, but my perception is that I'm overwhelmed by the event. Emotionally, I am disoriented. I don't know what to do in this moment. I don't have a sense of how to proceed because I'm overwhelmed by the event. The second pillar that is important is that I also perceive that there's nothing that I can do about it. I have no agency. So for instance, you could train a baby elephant to be tied to a rope that's tied to a stake driven deeply into the ground, and the baby elephant can't move it. And if you keep it there for enough time, when that elephant is full grown, you can keep it where you want to keep it by doing the same thing. Its perception is that it cannot move the stake. My brain will continue to have to contain that and cope with that particular set of events until some point in my future, I'm no longer able to cope with it. And when it blows into my doors, I don't know what to do. The opening story of this chapter tells the story of a young woman who was sexually abused by her youth pastor. This is a woman who was able to go on and function effectively. But when she got married to a man who then later succumbed to a former pornography addiction, she was overwhelmed by memory of old events, despite the fact that she was able to function in many respects in her life. That one event began to be overwhelming for her, and she perceived that she wasn't experienced in life, perhaps, where trauma has perhaps taken place, but I've worked really, really hard to ignore it. And then the question becomes, how is that affecting me in keeping me from being able to create beauty and goodness in the world, because I'm devoting so much energy to having to contain and cope with this in ways that I often don't understand. And then also, within the church, we have difficulty with this because we often are not aware enough to know how to handle this when it shows up on our doorstep, as it often does.
So, Curt, it's fair to say, no matter who you are, to some degree or another, just the nature of being alive, all of us have experienced some form of trauma. Yeah?
I think that's fair to say. I think that it's very fair to say. The question becomes, when these events occur, and we talked about this in the book, that one of the most potent features of how trauma works is it's isolating
upon us.
Exactly. And I think the fact that we are not just experiencing it individually, but we experience it as a culture, we experience it as a corporate group of people, the sense that I'm aware that I'm disconnected from you, you're disconnected from me, but we collectively are disconnected. And this is often how shame will want to work its kind of darker magic, this sense that it's not just me that's isolated. We are isolated as a group. There's nothing that we can do about this. And that's where the trauma of this kind of geometrically rises, because we collectively as a group feel powerless to do much about that. I think the good news about the gospel is that to the degree that we are paying attention to the fact that Jesus didn't come to save us as a set of, as individuals. He came to save us as a people. He came to save humanity. Yes,
which is coming up next weekend. Unfortunately, I'm very sad that it's not happening in person, but it will happen on a virtual basis. So tell us about that. It's a real honor, Curt.
Well, it is an honor. I go back to, I was introduced to Jubilee when I was in college. My wife worked for the CCO. We've been longtime supporters of it, and there are few gatherings that I'm aware of that do the kind of work that Jubilee does for college students, and even for those of us who are going to this and who are attending this. You mentioned Byron Borger. I mean, the fact that someone like Byron and his wealth of knowledge and experience as a person of literary endeavor is there. All these things are really crucially important. And it is an honor for me I've been invited to speak about the fall of humankind. And I want to say that for the
entering year 3, hopefully there's some freedom in sight for a lot of people. But of course, we as a world, we have been traumatized. Have you seen people coming into the office? Maybe I think a lot of people would come into a psychiatrist or a therapist office reluctantly. They don't need it. They're stronger than this. They're better than that. But systems have fallen down to a point where they have no other choice. This is a pretty common thing, isn't it?
It's very common. And the word I would have for this is, Jesus' words to us was that he doesn't, look, I'm not here for those who are well. The doctor is here for those who are not well. And as we've said before here, I think even on this program, the pandemic didn't just create problems for us. It pulled the curtain back on the problems that have long been there. Sure. And in some respects, it really gives us the opportunity to welcome Jesus to come and take care of those of us who have been sick for much longer than the pandemic has been going on.
Yeah, that's really good. That is really good. Yeah. For people, Curt, who've never had therapy and they're listening to us talk and they're like,
therapy's purpose, counseling's purpose, is to enable all of us to tell our stories more truly, and so live into the gospel that Jesus is inviting us to pay attention to, instead of our old broken stories that evil wants us to pay attention to.
Fabulous.
Boy, it's so good. Curt, thank you. It's a total pleasure to have you on Zoom. Seriously. Super
oh my
fun.
God, the pleasure is totally mine. I couldn't believe my good fortune when you said that Zoom is a possibility.
That's so awesome. Great. Anyway, check out Curt's book, The Soul of Desire, Discovering the Neuroscience of Longing, Beauty, and Community. Look him up. Jubilee.
Dr. Curt Thompson.
Bye, Curt.
There are some decisions in life that just flat out